He called me stupid, a pretty accessory who knew nothing of his business. But tonight, in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, I was about to serve him a meal of his own lies. The clinking of silverware against fine china was the only sound that dared to compete with my husband's voice. We were seated at a corner table in Celeste, a restaurant so exclusive you couldn't find it on Google Maps. It existed on the top floor of a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, and the city lights below us looked like a fallen constellation. The price of a single appetizer here could cover our first month's rent in the tiny apartment where it all began. But Mark, my husband, seemed to have forgotten all about that apartment. He was holding court, as he always did. His audience tonight consisted of a potential new investor, a silver-haired titan of industry named Mr. Harrison, and his perpetually unimpressed wife. Mark's hands, adorned with a ridiculously expensive watch I'd bought him for his last birthday, sliced through the air as he described the meteoric rise of his company, Aura Innovations. His company. The words tasted like ash in my mouth every time he said them. It was all about vision, you see, Richard, Mark said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial gleam in his eyes. When I started, it was just a dusty old concept, a hobby, really. But I saw the potential. I saw the future. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, the deep crimson liquid a perfect match for the simmering rage in my chest. A dusty old hobby. That's what he called my father's life's work. My father, a brilliant but gentle engineer, had spent 2 decades in our garage, tinkering and dreaming, sketching in notebooks that I still kept locked in my safe at home. He had developed the foundational technology for Aura Innovations. After he passed, I was lost. Mark, then my boyfriend of 2 years, saw an opportunity. He was charming, ambitious, and he promised he would help me bring my father's dream to life, to build a legacy in his name. I was grieving and naive, and I believed him. And my lovely wife Clara, Mark said, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders. It was meant to look affectionate, but to me it felt like a leash. She's been my rock, incredibly supportive. Every great man needs a beautiful woman behind him, right? He gave my shoulder a patronizing squeeze. Mr. Harrison offered me a polite, lukewarm smile. His wife just raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. They'd seen this show 1,000 times before. The powerful CEO and his pretty, silent wife. The accessory. For years I had played the part. I smiled at dinners, organized his social calendar, chose his suits, and listened to him practice pitches in the mirror. I even proofread the business plans he would later claim were entirely his own genius. I did it because I loved him, and because I thought we were a team, building our future on the foundation of my father's legacy. But slowly the foundation had cracked. The man I married had been consumed by the character he played in boardrooms. The charming Mark was now a persona he put on for investors. The man I lived with was dismissive, arrogant, and increasingly cruel. He'd started small, with backhanded compliments. That's a surprisingly smart idea, honey. Then it evolved into outright dismissal. Clara, please, let the men handle the numbers. Tonight felt like a culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts. Mr. Harrison, a man who clearly hadn't built his empire by being easily charmed, steered the conversation back to specifics. You mentioned your new Q line of processors, Mark. The efficiency stats are impressive, but I have concerns about the thermal output. Your competitors have struggled with similar designs, leading to significant hardware degradation over time. What's your mitigation strategy? A flicker of panic crossed Mark's face. It was almost imperceptible, but I knew him better than anyone. This was his weak spot. He was a phenomenal salesman, a master of charisma and broad strokes. But the intricate technical details, the science my father had bled for, that was my domain. He'd learned enough to sound convincing, but he hadn't truly understood the soul of the technology. He cleared his throat, taking a long drink of water to buy himself a few seconds. Well, Richard, that's a fantastic question. It speaks to your acumen. Our strategy is robust. We employ a multifaceted approach, leveraging proprietary cooling solutions and next-generation materials to ensure optimal performance. It was a word salad, a beautiful, expensive, but ultimately meaningless word salad. He was bluffing, and Mr. Harrison knew it. I could see the older man's interest beginning to wane. The multi-million-dollar investment was slipping through Mark's fingers. And in that moment, something in me snapped. It wasn't just about the money. It was about my father. It was about the late nights I'd spent poring over those old notebooks, cross-referencing them with modern research papers to solve the very problem Mr. Harrison was asking about. The solution wasn't Mark's proprietary cooling solutions. It was mine. I waited for a brief pause in the conversation, then spoke, my voice quiet but clear. We're actually using a layered graphene-boron nitride composite as a heat spreader, I said, looking directly at Mr. Harrison. The anisotropic thermal properties of the hexagonal boron nitride allow it to insulate the chip vertically, while the graphene layer provides exceptional lateral heat dissipation. It effectively funnels the heat away from the core components to the outer casing without compromising processing speed. It reduces thermal degradation by an estimated 34% over a 5-year operational lifespan. The table went silent. Mr. Harrison stared at me, his eyes wide with genuine surprise and dawning respect. His wife leaned forward slightly, her boredom vanishing. Mark, however, looked as if I had just slapped him across the face in front of the entire restaurant. His face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. The charming facade shattered, and the ugly man I lived with was suddenly on full display. He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He patted my hand as if I were a child who had just recited a nursery rhyme. "Listen to you. It's so cute when you try to use the big words you've overheard." He turned back to Mr. Harrison, trying to regain control. "My wife likes to read the company brochures. She's a very dedicated supporter." But Mr. Harrison wasn't looking at Mark anymore. He was looking at me. "That's a far more detailed explanation than I've received from your head of R&D, Mark. Mrs. Evans, that's brilliant. Is that technology currently in the prototypes?" "It is," I confirmed, my confidence growing. I oversaw the final phase of integration myself. Mark's jaw tightened so hard I could hear his teeth grind. The deal was saved, but his ego was in tatters. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand that I was the one who had shown, even for a second. His hand tightened on my shoulder, the grip now painful. He leaned close, his voice a low, vicious hiss meant only for me, but in the tomb-like silence of the table, everyone heard it. "You need to shut your mouth. You're embarrassing me. Don't you understand how stupid you sound, pretending you know anything about my business?" My business. Stupid. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. It echoed with every other dismissive comment, every patronizing pat on the head, every time he had taken credit for my ideas. The city lights outside seemed to blur. The expensive food on my plate turned to cardboard. All I could feel was an icy calm spreading through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been both dreading and preparing for. I slowly pulled my shoulder from his grip and straightened my back. I met his furious gaze not with tears or anger, but with a serene, chilling smile. The smile of a woman who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. "Stupid," I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. The whole table was frozen, watching the drama unfold. "That's a very interesting choice of words, Mark." I reached down and picked up my clutch from my lap, a sleek black designer piece he had bought me last Christmas. "A trophy for my trophy wife," he'd joked. He had no idea what I'd started carrying inside it for the past 6 months. With deliberate, theatrical slowness, I unclasped it. I didn't reach for a tissue or my lipstick. I reached past them, my fingers finding the crisp edges of a folded set of documents. I pulled out the thick, legal-sized envelope and placed it on the pristine white tablecloth, right between his plate of half-eaten steak and Mr. Harrison's glass of scotch. Mark stared at the plain manila envelope, as if it were a snake. "What the hell is that?" he snarled. My smile never left my face. In fact, it widened. "You know, you're right about one thing. You did take my father's dusty old hobby and build it into something," I said, my voice as clear and cold as the ice in my water glass. "But you seem to have forgotten who paid for the tools, who owned the workshop, and who, in a moment of grief-stricken foolishness, signed over control but never, ever signed over ownership. With a flick of my wrist, I pushed the envelope toward the center of the table. These, Mr. Harrison, are the incorporation documents and the original seed funding contracts for Aura Innovations, and I suggest you take a very close look at the name listed under majority shareholder and chairman of the board. The silence at the table was so profound I could hear the faint hum of the skyscraper's ventilation system. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief. His skin stretched taut over his cheekbones. His eyes, which moments ago had been filled with smug superiority, were now wide with a dawning horror. He looked from the envelope to my face and back again, his brain struggling to process a reality that simply did not compute. Mr. Harrison, on the other hand, reacted with the cool decisiveness of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. Without a word, he reached across the table, his manicured fingers closing around the envelope. Mark flinched as if the man had reached for his very heart. "Mark, I don't think—" my husband started, his voice a strangled whisper, but Mr. Harrison held up a hand, silencing him without even looking at him. His entire focus was on me, a new sharp respect in his gaze. He slid the documents out. They were pristine, the laser-printed text stark and official. He scanned the first page, then the second. His wife, Mrs. Harrison, leaned over his shoulder, her perfectly glossed lips parted in a small O of fascination. She looked at me over the rim of her husband's glasses and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated female solidarity. Articles of Incorporation for Aura Technologies, LLC, Mr. Harrison read aloud, his voice low and measured. He flipped a page. List of founding members. Clara Ann Evans, 90% ownership. Mark Evans, 10% ownership. Granted in consideration of services as Chief Executive Officer. He continued flipping. Assignment of all patents, from the estate of Dr. Robert Evans to his sole heir, Clara Ann Evans, signed and notarized. Each word was a nail being hammered into the lid of Mark's coffin. His carefully constructed world, his empire built on my foundation, was being dismantled in front of the one man he desperately wanted to impress. The 10% was a concession I'd made years ago, a foolishly romantic gesture to make him feel like a true partner. I see now it was just enough to feed his ego, to make him believe the whole thing was his. This is a joke, Mark stammered, finally finding his voice. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a choked, desperate sound. She's confused. These are old papers. Obsolete. My lawyers— Are they, Mark? Mr. Harrison cut in, his voice like steel. He held up the final document I had included. Because this is the minutes from the last official board meeting, held 18 months ago. A board, I might add, that appears to consist of you and your wife. The motion to reaffirm your position as CEO was passed, but it seems there was no motion to amend the original ownership structure. It's signed by both of you. Mark stared at the document. I remembered that day perfectly. It was a formality I'd insisted on, and he'd been annoyed, impatient to get to his golf game. He'd scrawled his signature on the line I'd indicated without even reading it, muttering something about pointless paperwork. Pointless paperwork was now the bedrock of my liberation. The color drained completely from his face. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see his supportive wife or his pretty accessory. He saw the person who held all the cards, the enemy. The rest of the dinner was a blur of excruciating civility. Mr. Harrison, a master of his craft, steered the conversation back to business, but directed all his technical questions to me. I answered them concisely, pulling from the deep well of knowledge I had cultivated in secret for years, reading my father's notes, taking online courses in materials, science, and corporate law, preparing for a day I hoped would never come. Mark sat in stony silence, a ghost at his own feast, his filet mignon growing cold on his plate. When the evening finally concluded, Mr. Say— Harrison shook my hand firmly. Madam Chairman, he said, the title rolling off his tongue with a certain satisfaction. That was the most enlightening business dinner I've had in years. Forget my concerns. You have a new partner. My office will send a preliminary offer to your legal team tomorrow morning. We'll be investing, and heavily." He then turned to Mark and gave him a brief, dismissive nod. Mark. The elevator ride down was a silent, suffocating descent from the heavens. Mark stood rigid in the corner, staring at his reflection in the polished brass walls. I watched him, feeling not triumph, but a profound and hollow sadness for the man I had once loved, the man he had murdered with his own ambition. The moment the doors of our private elevator opened into the penthouse apartment, the silence shattered. "How could you?" he roared, spinning on me, his face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. "How could you humiliate me like that? In front of Richard Harrison, you've ruined everything." "I've ruined everything," I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I walked past him, slipping off my heels and placing my clutch on the marble island in the kitchen. "You called me stupid, Mark. You did it while I was saving the very deal your ignorance was about to torpedo. You didn't think that had a cost? That was a slip of the tongue. We were in a tense negotiation," he yelled, following me, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. This is a betrayal. This is premeditated. How long have you been planning this?" 6 months, I said simply, turning to face him. "Ever since you forgot to mention my father's name during the acceptance speech for the Innovator of the Year award, the award for his technology. That's when I hired my own legal team and started preparing." He staggered back as if I'd physically struck him. "Your own legal team? You went behind my back? We're married, Clara." "Yes, we are." "And as my husband, you had a fiduciary duty to the majority shareholder. A duty you have been violating for years by misrepresenting the company's origins and my role in it. By taking a salary that is frankly obscene, while I, the owner, have seen nothing." He scoffed, a wild look in his eyes. He started pacing, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time all night. "You've seen nothing? This apartment, the cars, the clothes. I gave you everything." "You gave me things," I corrected him. "Things bought with my money, my father's legacy. You didn't build this company, Mark. You were its caretaker. A caretaker who got greedy and started believing the house belonged to him. Well, the owner is back, and your services are no longer required." His head snapped up. "What did you say? As of 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, you are officially on a leave of absence, pending a full audit of your expenses and executive decisions. A special board meeting has been called. As it's a 2-person board, I'll be the only one in attendance. My first motion will be to remove you as CEO for cause." He stared at me, his breathing ragged. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating dread. He thought he could still salvage this. He thought he still had leverage. "You can't do that," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He took a step closer, trying to reclaim some of our old intimacy. "Clara, you can't run Aura without me. I'm the face of the company. I handle the investors, the press, the team. David, Sarah, the entire R&D department. They are loyal to me. They'll walk the second you try to push me out. The company will collapse in a week. Harrison will pull his investment. You'll be left with nothing but a pile of worthless patents." He thought it was a threat. He thought it was his trump card. He had no idea I'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers. I let a small, sad smile touch my lips. "You really shouldn't have skipped so many of those pointless HR meetings, Mark. You might have noticed the new employee incentive program. I had them draft up last month." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "The one that ties senior staff bonuses directly to patent implementation and grants them substantial stock options that vest immediately upon a change in executive leadership." I paused, letting the words sink in. "They aren't loyal to you, Mark. They're loyal to my father's work. And now they're loyal to their own futures. Futures that, as of tomorrow, will be a lot richer with you gone." I watched his face crumble as the finality of his defeat washed over him. He had nothing. No power. No leverage. No loyalty. But as I looked into his eyes, I didn't see surrender. I saw the cornered rat, the kind that will chew off its own leg to escape a trap. "Fine," he hissed, his voice venomous and low. "Fine. You want the company? Take it. Let's see you run it into the ground. But you won't get rid of me that easily. There are other ways to control a company. There are things investors don't know, things about the brilliant Dr. Robert Evans and where his genius really came from. My blood ran cold. My father was a saint to me, a man of unimpeachable integrity. It had to be a bluff, a desperate, pathetic lie from a dying king. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. A cruel, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He finally had a weapon. "Go look in the back of his old safe, the one in his study, the one you never knew the combination to. But I do. He told me, once, for emergencies. I'd say this qualifies, wouldn't you?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. My father's old safe. It was a hulking, black iron beast tucked away behind a false bookshelf in his home study, a room I had preserved exactly as he'd left it. It was his sanctuary, filled with the scent of old paper, pipe tobacco, and his particular brand of genius. I had the key, but he'd never told me the combination. He'd always said the contents were for a rainy day, and that I'd know when it was time. Mark knowing the combination felt like a violation, a posthumous betrayal. "You're lying," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but we both knew I didn't believe it. My father had liked Mark in the beginning. He saw the ambition in him, the drive he himself had lacked. It was entirely plausible that in a moment of misplaced trust, he had shared the secret with the man he thought would help his daughter build his legacy. "The combination is his birthday," Mark said, with a lazy, triumphant drawl. "Month, day, last 2 digits of the year. 114862. Simple, sentimental. Just like him." He watched my face, saw the flicker of recognition that confirmed he was telling the truth, and his smirk widened. "He told me there were things in there to protect the company, to protect you. I never bothered to look. I never needed to. But you, Clara, you've created quite the rainy day." With that parting shot, he turned on his heel and strode toward the master bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the vast, silent kitchen. The city lights twinkling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows suddenly felt cold and mocking. My victory, which had seemed so absolute just moments ago, now felt fragile, tainted by a threat I couldn't comprehend. Sleep was impossible. The apartment, once a symbol of our success, now felt like a gilded prison. Every shadow seemed to hold a question. Every quiet creak of the building, a judgment. As soon as the first gray light of dawn broke over the city, I was gone. I drove not to the gleaming glass tower of Aura Innovations, but back to the quiet, tree-lined street where I grew up, back to my father's house. Letting myself in with my old key, the familiar scent of the house wrapped around me like a hug. It was a scent of safety, of love, of a time before everything became so complicated. But there was no comfort to be found today. I walked directly to his study, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I pulled back the worn, leather-bound copy of Pick's The Complete Works of Shakespeare, and the bookshelf swung inward, revealing the cold iron face of the safe. My hand trembled as I reached for the dial. 11, 48, 62. The numbers felt alien, a code to a secret part of my father's life. The dial clicked, the tumblers fell into place, and with a heavy groan, the thick door swung open. The inside smelled of dust and time. It wasn't filled with stock certificates or bearer bonds as I might have imagined. Instead, there was just a single, thick, leather-bound ledger and a small velvet pouch. I reached for the ledger first. The leather was cracked with age, and the front was embossed with a single, unfamiliar symbol, a stylized letter K intertwined with a gear. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was not my father's neat, blocky script. This was an elegant, flowing cursive, written in faded fountain pen ink. The first entry was dated over 70 years ago. It began, "Project Chimera, Entry Log 1. We have achieved stable integration. The cognitive framework is responsive, more than we could have hoped for. My work is done. It is up to Robert now to be its shepherd." Robert. My father. My mind reeled. What was Project Chimera? Whose handwriting was this? I flipped through the pages. It was a logbook, a scientific diary filled with equations and observations that were far beyond my understanding. It detailed the creation of an advanced computational matrix, an artificial intelligence, but the language was strange, almost esoteric. It spoke of neural pathways, heuristic learning, and ethical imprinting. It described a machine that could not just calculate, but create, a machine that could innovate. The final entries were from 25 years ago, just before I was born. The core is stable, but its creative output is unpredictable. It requires a human element, a guide. Robert has the heart for it, but not the killer instinct. I fear what will happen when this technology sees the light of day. I have left him the means to protect it and to protect his family. May he never have to use them. The last entry was signed with a single name. Kalen. Kalen. The name meant nothing to me, but the implications were earth-shattering. My father, the brilliant innovator, had he been a shepherd, not the creator? Was Aura Innovations, his entire life's work, built upon a foundation laid by someone else? Was this the secret Mark was threatening to reveal? That my father was a fraud? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. With shaking hands, I reached back into the safe and picked up the small velvet pouch. It was heavy for its size. I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. It wasn't a key or a code. It was a single, custom-made microprocessor, unlike anything I had ever seen. It was crafted from a dark, iridescent material, and etched onto its surface was the same symbol from the ledger. The K intertwined with a gear. It was a kill switch. I knew it instantly, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. This was the protection Kalen had written about. This chip, if integrated into Aura's core systems, would likely cause a catastrophic, system-wide failure. It was a self-destruct button for my entire company, my entire legacy. My father had never used it. He had trusted his work, trusted the world. But he had left it, just in case. My phone buzzed, startling me from my trance. It was Sarah, my newly appointed head of R&D. "Clara?" "Good morning, Madam Chairman," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and nerves. "We've secured the labs. Everyone is on board. We're ready for your direction." I took a deep breath, pushing the turmoil in my mind aside. "Good. Lock down Mark's executive accounts and begin the audit. I want a full report on his spending for the last 2 years. I'll be there in an hour." "Understood," she said. "Oh, and one more thing. Mark came by the office this morning, very early. He didn't try to get in, just dropped off a package with security for you. Said it was urgent." "A package?" I asked, my blood running cold again. "Yeah, a data drive. He said it contained essential corporate history that you'd need for the transition." I knew, with sickening certainty, what was on that drive. It would be copies of this ledger, Mark's final, desperate move. He wasn't going to leak it to the press or the investors yet. That would destroy the company and his own 10% stake along with it. No, this was blackmail. He was giving me a choice: reinstate him, or he would expose my father as a fraud and burn the entire kingdom to the ground. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was electric. The news of Mark's ousting had spread like wildfire. There were whispers in the hallways, small groups of people talking in hushed tones. But there was also a palpable sense of relief, of excitement. As I walked through the main atrium, people met my eye, offering small smiles and nods of support. Mark had been a charismatic leader, but he had also become a tyrant. The team was ready for a change. They were ready for me. The data drive was on my new desk. Mark's old desk, a vast expanse of polished mahogany overlooking the city. My hands were steady as I plugged it into my laptop. As I suspected, it contained high-resolution scans of every single page of Kalen's ledger. The last file was a short video message from Mark. I clicked play. His face filled the screen. He was in his car, looking haggard but defiant. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice smooth and menacing. "A little light reading for your first day on the job. It turns out your sainted father wasn't quite the genius everyone thought he was. He was just tending someone else's garden. Imagine what Richard Harrison would think if he knew his multi-million-dollar investment was based on stolen, undocumented technology. Imagine what the world would think. He leaned closer to the camera. "You have until 5 p.m. today. Reinstate me as CEO with a new, ironclad contract giving me a 51% controlling stake. In return, I will destroy my copy of this drive, and we can go back to how things were. If you refuse, well, this little video and all these files go to every major news outlet and a blind CC to your entire list of investors. The choice is yours, Madam Chairman." Tick-tock. The video ended. 5 p.m. He had given me an ultimatum. My father's reputation, the company's future, my entire world, all hanging in the balance. I could surrender to his blackmail and become a prisoner in my own company, or I could defy him and watch my father's legacy, fraudulent or not, turn to ash. I sat there for a long time staring at the screen, the weight of it all pressing down on me. There had to be another way. There had to be something I was missing. My eyes fell on the ledger which I had brought with me. I started reading it again, not just the technical details, but the words themselves. Kalen's voice seemed to speak to me from across the decades, a voice of brilliance tinged with caution and regret. And then I saw it. A small notation on the very last page, tucked away beneath his signature. It wasn't an equation or a technical note. It was a sequence of letters and numbers that looked almost like a bank routing number, followed by a name. The Archival Institute of Zurich. A frantic search online revealed it was a real place, a highly secure private repository in Switzerland, famous for storing sensitive documents, intellectual property, and historical artifacts for wealthy clients. A digital vault for the world's elite. What had Kalen stored there? Was it more research? Proof of his ownership? My mind was racing. I needed access to that archive. I needed to know what was in that vault. But I had no key, no password, nothing but a string of characters. I looked back at the kill switch chip, still sitting on my desk, its iridescent surface seeming to mock me. It was the key to destruction, not salvation. Or was it? I picked it up, turning it over and over in my fingers. Kalen had called it a means to protect the company, but destroying the company wasn't protection. What if its purpose wasn't what I thought? I looked closer at the intricate etchings on its surface. They weren't just decorative. They were circuits, microscopic pathways, and at the center, so small I had almost missed it, was the K-gear symbol. It wasn't just a logo. It was a button, a physical, pressable button. My heart stopped. It was a crazy, desperate idea. A 1-in-a-million shot. But it was the only shot I had. With my thumb, I pressed down on the tiny symbol. The chip was inert, cold. Nothing happened. Of course not. It needed a power source. It needed to be connected to a system. It needed a reader. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the chip and ran from my office, down the hall to the secure R&D lab. Sarah and her team looked up in surprise as I burst through the doors. "I need the main server interface now," I commanded, "and give me a micro-soldering kit and a diagnostic scanner, the most sensitive one you have." Confused but obedient, they scrambled to do as I asked. I sat at the main terminal, the beating heart of Aura Innovations, the direct link to the core AI my father had shepherded. With trembling hands, I soldered 2 minuscule wires to the chip and connected it to the diagnostic port. My screen flickered, then filled with scrolling lines of code. It was recognizing the chip as a foreign device. A security protocol flashed up. Unknown hardware detected. Authentication required. This was it, the moment of truth. I didn't have a password. All I had was the string of numbers from the ledger. I typed in the sequence for the Archival Institute of Zurich. The screen flashed red. Authentication failed. Second attempt. My heart sank. It was the wrong code. Mark's deadline was ticking closer. I had one more chance before the system would lock me out permanently, flagging it as a hostile attack. What was I missing? I stared at the ledger in my mind's eye. Project Chimera. Kalen. Robert the Shepherd. The name. Chimera. In mythology, a creature made of parts from multiple animals. What if this technology wasn't just Kalen's? What if my father wasn't just a shepherd, but a partner? What if the key wasn't one code, but 2? A combination. With fumbling fingers, I typed Kalen's code again. But this time I didn't press enter. I added my father's birthday, the combination to the safe, the two halves of the whole, the creator and the shepherd. I held my breath and hit enter. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The screen was frozen. Then a single line of green text appeared. Authentication successful. Welcome, administrator. Chimera protocol engaged. Decryption. Key to Zurich archive unlocked. Would you like to execute? My finger hovered over the enter key. A wave of cool air from the server room vent washed over me, a stark contrast to the fire of adrenaline in my veins. Execute. The word was so final, so absolute. For a moment the faces of my team flashed in my mind. Sarah, David, all the brilliant engineers who had dedicated their lives to this technology. Was I about to unlock its salvation or trigger its annihilation? The kill switch. The name echoed with menace, but Kalen's words came back to me, a means to protect it. I took a deep breath and pressed enter. The reaction was instantaneous, but it wasn't the catastrophic shutdown I had feared. There was no cascade of system failures, no wailing alarms. Instead, the main server emitted a low, resonant hum, a sound I had never heard before. The lights on the server racks, normally a steady blue, began to pulse in a slow, rhythmic green. On my monitor, the lines of code vanished, replaced by a sleek, minimalist interface I'd never seen. A single progress bar appeared, its title reading, Downloading Zurich Archive, File Packet, Kalen Evans Contingency. A collective gasp went through the lab. Sarah rushed to my side, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. What is that? I've never seen that OS before. It's like a hidden partition of the core AI. It's not a kill switch, I whispered, a slow dawning realization washing over me. It's a key. It was never meant to destroy the company. It was meant to unlock its truth. The download was astonishingly fast. Within minutes, a single, heavily encrypted file sat on my desktop. The decryption key the chip had provided worked instantly. I clicked it open, and my world shifted on its axis. It was a treasure trove. There were legal documents, digitally signed and time-stamped, establishing a formal partnership between Dr. Kalen Reed and my father, Dr. Robert Evans. Kalen was the visionary, the architect of the core AI, but my father was the one who had humanized it, who had developed the ethical subroutines and the creative learning algorithms that made it so revolutionary. They weren't creator and caretaker. They were partners. My father hadn't stolen anything. He had built upon a shared dream. There were also personal video logs. I clicked on the first one. A man in his late 40s appeared on screen, his hair a wild shock of white, his eyes sparkling with a manic genius. It was Kalen Reed. He was in a lab that looked like a more advanced version of my father's garage. Log entry 247, he began. Robert's done it. He's cracked the ethical matrix. Chimera isn't just a processor anymore. It's a collaborator. It can anticipate human needs. It can create art. He's given my engine a soul. He smiled, a look of pure admiration on his face. We've agreed. The world isn't ready for this. Not yet. It's too easy to weaponize, to exploit. We're putting it to sleep for a generation. Robert will be its guardian. When the time is right, his heir will take the reins. We've set up the contingency, the key. It will only activate when both halves of our legacy, my code, his heart, are brought together. A final failsafe. Tears streamed down my face as I watched. My father wasn't a fraud. He was a guardian, a silent partner in the greatest technological leap of the century. He had kept it a secret not out of shame, but out of a profound sense of responsibility. Mark's blackmail wasn't a weapon, it was a ghost story, a hollow threat built on a lie he didn't even understand. But the final file was the masterstroke. It was a pre-drafted press release, complete with quotes from both Kalen and my father, dated 25 years ago. It announced the existence of Project Chimera, the partnership, and the reasons for its secrecy. It was a corporate narrative so compelling, so full of intrigue and visionary thinking, that it would not only diffuse the scandal Mark threatened, but turn it into the greatest PR story in tech history. The reclusive geniuses, the secret project, the daughter carrying the torch. It was perfect. I looked at the clock on my screen. 4:45 p.m. Mark's deadline was 15 minutes away. My phone buzzed. It was him. A single text message. "Time's almost up, Clara. Ready to beg?" I didn't text back. I forwarded the press release, the legal partnership agreement, and a short video log of my father explaining his hopes for the future to a single email address. Richard Harrison. I attached a short note. Richard. A little corporate history Mark seemed to have missed. The real story is always more interesting. Looking forward to our partnership, Clara. Then I stood up and faced my team. Their faces were a mixture of awe, confusion, and hope. "Sarah," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority I didn't know I possessed. "Draft an internal memo, full transparency. I want everyone at Aura Innovations to know the real story of our founding, and schedule an all-hands meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. We have a new chapter to write." I walked out of the lab and back to my office, the mahogany behemoth that now felt like it was truly mine. I sat in the large leather chair and swiveled to face the window, watching the sun dip below the skyline, painting the clouds in hues of orange and gold. I was calm. The storm had passed. At exactly 5:01 p.m., my office door burst open. Mark stood there, his face a thunderous mask of fury and confusion. He was holding his phone, his hand shaking. "What did you do?" he seethed. "What the hell did you send to Harrison?" "The truth," I said simply, not even bothering to turn and face him. I just watched his distorted reflection in the glass. "Something you've never been very interested in." He called me," Mark stammered. "He said his investment was now contingent on my immediate and permanent removal from the company. He called me a footnote." "That sounds about right," I said. "Your 10% stake will be subject to a buyout clause, which I will be exercising. The audit has already revealed enough evidence of expense account fraud to make it a very, very small number. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He took a step into the room, his fists clenched. "You can't just erase me. I built this company." Finally, I turned my chair to face him. The pity I'd felt before was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "No, Mark, you didn't. You were the flashy facade on a building you never understood. You were so busy polishing the brass on the front door you never bothered to check the foundation. My father and his partner built this company. I am protecting it. You were just in the way." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The bluster, the arrogance, the charisma, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a small, pathetic man, utterly defeated. He saw that he had no power here, no leverage, nothing. He was irrelevant. Without another word, he turned and walked away. I heard his footsteps recede down the hall, the sound of my past fading into the distance. The next morning, the all-hands meeting was standing room only. I stood on the stage, not behind a podium, but at the front, open and direct. I told them everything. I played the video of my father, his kind face filling the giant screen, his voice filled with passion and hope. I told them about Kalen Reed, about Project Chimera, about the incredible legacy they were all now a part of. The atmosphere in the room transformed from one of nervous uncertainty to one of pure, unadulterated excitement. We weren't just a processor company anymore. We were the custodians of a legend. After the meeting, Mr. Harrison was waiting for me. He had a broad smile on his face. "Madam Chairman," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "that was the best damn story I've ever heard. Our initial investment offer? I'm doubling it." In the weeks that followed, Aura Innovations was reborn. The press went wild with the story of Kalen and Robert, the secret fathers of modern AI. Our stock price, when we eventually went public, shattered all expectations. I didn't just save my father's company. I unleashed its true potential. I found my own voice, my own strength, not as a silent partner or a supportive wife, but as a leader. My father had been the shepherd, Kalen the architect. I was the builder, and I was just getting started.